Thanks for listening to Uncle Sam's Soccer Podcast, keeping you up to date with the latest in American soccer. And don't forget to subscribe.
Hello everyone, welcome to Uncle Sam's Soccer Podcast. My name is Steven Jodder, joining me today is Armand Kafai and Jake Wetruba. And on today's episode, we wrap everything up with the U.S. women and their fourth World Cup title. We also got Yahoo Sports insider Doug McIntyre joining us to give us the inside scoop of what it was like being in France. Now listeners, if you haven't done so, hit that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review, and follow us at Uncle Sam's Soccer Pod. Now Jake, Armand, it's been over a week now since the U.S. women have lifted their fourth World Cup title, and the media buzz seems to continue on.
It still does. No, it does. It's funny because with like social media, we can see everything, right? You go on Instagram, you see them posting stories, you see them at the ESPYs. Maybe it'll slow down at some point, but I don't see it for another couple of weeks at least.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, they are the media darlings right now of not only U.S. soccer, but they're making appearances everywhere. You have the fans of the Ashlyn Harris Instagram stories too, which people seem to.
I love them. They're hilarious.
They can't get enough. You got Megan Rapinoe making appearances left and right. I saw a video this morning of J-Lo giving Carly Lloyd a lap dance at Madison Square Garden, I think earlier this weekend.
Yep.
Everyone wants a piece of the U.S. women's national team.
Yeah, guys. And looking back at the TV numbers, 14.3 million viewers watched Fox's broadcast of the final. That's 22% more viewers than the men's final in 2018. That was at 12.5 million. It was the most watched soccer telecast in the U.S. since the 2015 women's final, the U.S. women versus Japan. And if I remember correctly, that final eclipsed like 24 million. Now that's just off the top of my head. But Jake, tell us more now that we are headed back to domestic soccer with the women's game.
Yeah, Steven, with the U.S. women's national team run to the final and with them ultimately being crowned world champions, that has spurred interest in NWSL and the future of the league. And some news that broke, I don't know if it was just before or just after the final, but ESPN has inked a TV rights deal with the league. ESPN has agreed to air 14 matches for the rest of this season on ESPN2 and ESPN News, including both semifinal matches and the championship game. The league previously had a 3-year TV deal with Lifetime and A&E Networks, which was abandoned in February, which would have been a year earlier than the contract was up. Armand or Steven, how big of a contract is this for NWSL?
So look, exposure-wise, it's obviously relatively bigger. You're in the worldwide leader in sports. We all know that ESPN gives that credibility boost. However, I'm interested to see if there's even any rights fee even paid to the NWSL. Because, for example, the XFL and the AAF, when they were around, their rights deals, they received very little money or none, but they wanted the exposure from those major networks. I wonder if that's the same case. I'm not sure even a fee is involved, but getting them on TV, I think we talked about this. For some reason, streaming is cool and all. Everyone says the future, but people still obviously prefer to watch on their TV. So having it on that family of networks, like even though they've been free on Yahoo Sports, I think I just prefer, if I was scrolling through channels, oh look, some NWSL's on, maybe I'll stick around and watch it. I think it's big from that standpoint, but I'm not sure if like a rights fee or anything it's even a thing, to be honest with you. Because sorry to interrupt you, Steve, Grant Wall, he mentioned on his show that, hey look, the NWSL might not, it's not guaranteed to exist next year, and you wouldn't be saying that if they received some sort of money like that was substantial enough.
It's an important deal. We'll see how it goes. Up next, Doug McIntyre.
Join us now on the show is Yahoo Sports soccer writer Doug McIntyre. You can follow him on Twitter at @ByDougMcIntyre. Hey Doug, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Arman. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Welcome back to the States. I know you've been here a couple of days, but talk about it. How was life in France for the month that you were there?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Thanks for asking. It was a thrill. I mean, any time you get to cover a major event like that, anytime you get to cover a World Cup, is a privilege. So, fantastic event. France is a great country, very easy to get around. There was a buzz in the cities. There was excitement. The games were fantastic. The stadiums were packed. There were American fans everywhere, and that was one of the big takeaways for me. There was just an incredible amount of support for that team, and the way they went through that tournament, the U.S. team was phenomenal. Just really interesting. Really, is my first experience covering that team that closely for that long, and to see how they were able to sort of block out any noise from the outside and or even use it to sort of fuel them was really interesting. I mean, tournaments are funny things. It's hard to get a group of people and confine them for a long period of time, and the team was together, more than 5 weeks when you add in the pre-tournament training session or training week that they had in London. They played friendly games before that. So if you can get that many people together and not only not kill each other, but actually, sort of grow stronger, which this team clearly did. It's very interesting and it stands out. And it's, I've covered a lot of teams over the years, and that was one thing I really noticed that, that not a lot of teams have, and it's such a, beyond the talent, it's such an important aspect of winning, and I think an underappreciated one. So that was really interesting to see.
Doug, you had mentioned there was a buzz in the air with the Women's World Cup in France. I believe there was forgive me, I don't know the publication, but they had the U.S. Women's National Team winning the final on the front page, and the Tour de France was on the back page. Can you talk a little bit more about how the country as a whole embraced the Women's World Cup?
Yeah, they certainly, and you're right. I mean, there was a ton of buzz. That was L'Equipe, the major sports magazine in France, I believe. I mean, there was a lot of that. We saw a tremendous amount of media coverage. The one thing I would say that was a little bit unfortunate was once the home team was eliminated, and they were calling it the final before the final, that France-U.S. game in Paris in the quarterfinals was such a marquee event. And in the lead up to that game, there was a huge swell of interest and enthusiasm from the French public. And unfortunately, I think that waned a little bit after the home team went out. There were still a ton of U.S. fans. Like I said, the semifinals and final were in Lyon, which is in a bit south, a few hours south of Paris, capital for women's soccer. But still, I mean, I think, everyone thinks of France. You think of Paris being where the stage is brightest. So different vibe in Lyon. It's a smaller city. And, American fans took it over, and so did the Dutch. I have to say the Dutch traveled in large numbers, especially for the semifinals and final, obviously, not far away. So I think a lot of people, came in for the final. But yeah, there was a lot of atmosphere, but the only unfortunate thing I would say is that because of the draw, France had to play against the U.S. in the quarterfinals and lost that game by a close margin. And France had been in there till the semis, or the final. I think we would have seen even more buzz in France, but it was still pretty impressive nonetheless. And it speaks to where I think the women's game is going, and just that tournament is growing by leaps and bounds every 4 years. So all of that was really good to see.
Doug, you talk about the atmospheres, but I was listening to a interview about the World Cup, and the person, I don't remember who was speaking, was the notable difference between the 2018 World Cup and this World Cup is that you have a lot more families in the stadiums. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, did you see a lot more of a family feel to some of these games?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't in Russia, like a lot of Americans, for the 2018 World Cup. Obviously, the the American soccer players weren't there either. But I did cover the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, and there's a different vibe. There's a different audience. It's a little more tame. You have I think for the men's World Cup, you have a lot of young urban professionals with disposable income and that are out at the bars and having a good time. And there was plenty of that. I got to say, there's plenty of that in France. But yeah, a bit more of a family vibe. A lot of kids. A lot of ponytailed hooligans. Little girls and a lot of little boys as well, which I think is important. Important to note. I was able to get my family over for a game, and my son and daughter went to the Chile game and thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, it's a great event, and there's nothing like a World Cup. But the Women's World Cup is different, and it's different covering it for a lot of reasons. The access to the players is a bit different. There's a lot of aspects to it that are very similar to a men's World Cup, and a lot that are quite different as well. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that the Women's World Cup is nearly as popular worldwide as the men's one is, but certainly when you look at a lot of the viewership numbers around the world for some of those games, particularly the final, I mean, more people in Brazil watched the final, and their team wasn't even in it than there were in the United States. So it's definitely reaching a different audience. And look, the games were fantastic. I mean, they were exciting games, and these are world-class athletes, and I think that soccer is such a great sport and such a great sport to watch that it's really about exposure. And I think a lot of people around the world were exposed to the women's game for the first time, and this tournament was a great advertisement for the sport, no question about it.
Now, Doug, I want to shift a little bit. Just kind of recapping with the U.S.'s performance in the World Cup, which obviously ended in stupendous fashion. In your article on July 7th, you said this, but it was hard, really hard, because it's always hard when there's a target on your back, and when a little luck is a requirement, and when almost every traditional soccer power there is determined to finally put these arrogant Americans in their place. Yeah. Were the U.S. kind of the evil villains of this tournament for the rest of the world?
A little bit. I mean, it's interesting, and there's it's definitely interesting traveling the world now. People are fascinated by what's going on in the U.S. You get a lot of questions about the political climate in the country. You get a lot of questions about the president, I think it's interesting. I mean, everybody wants to knock off the top dog. That's the same in any sport. So that was certainly the case. I think other teams would like to have seen the U.S. lose, but there was also, and I was surprised. I mean, I spoke to there was a waitress in the hotel, one of the hotel restaurants, or one of the restaurants in the hotels that we were staying at, and she was from Spain, and this was the day after the U.S.-Spain game, and she said, "I have a secret. I was cheering for the U.S. team against my own country, basically, because of how good they are, because they like the way they played. She liked the way that they played, and I thought that was fascinating. So you actually had a lot of admirers of the U.S. team as well, just because they were so good and so dominant, and I think everyone recognized that early on. I mean, even a lot of the French people that I spoke to said, we have a good team, but I think the U.S. is unstoppable. I don't think we're going to be able to win this game. Talking in the lead up to that quarterfinal, and obviously that turned out to be the case. And I think, but I think a lot of folks that are critical of the United States or the administration in place now, I thought they really got behind the team because of the dispute on Twitter between President Trump and Megan Rapinoe. I think that was interesting that a lot of folks seemed obviously polarizing in a lot of ways, and that turned people off. But I think for the international audience, that was something that made them get behind the U.S. team as opposed to the opposite. So that part of it was interesting. I mean, we all looked at sports as an escape, but international sports and politics are always intertwined. It's just the nature of it. So that aspect was pretty interesting, and really transcended the tournament. And it was an interesting day. I got to tell you that we had Megan Rapinoe in the press conference the day after all that stuff kind of blew up, and it was fascinating. And a lot of people, a lot of athletes, a lot of people would would have shied away or backed down or whatever. And it was very interesting to see how she handled all of that. She's one of the most unflappable subjects I've ever covered. So to see her in that element, and by the way, she wasn't alone. I thought all the women on the U.S. team handled that situation very very well. So it was that was an interesting few days and really fun to be a part of.
Doug, I want to touch upon the Rapinoe and Trump dispute a little bit more here. With some of the people you spoke to in France, how did they perceive the off-field noise between the two? You mentioned that it was kind of almost like a rallying call for the rest of the world to be on the U.S. women's side, but can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting on the one hand, I mean, there's two schools of thought immediately when that happened. Like, this is either going to hurt the U.S. team or it's going to help them, and you could see it both ways. And originally, I thought, this is a big time distraction. It comes out right before the France game. I mean, this is a month-old video. I got to say, I mean, it took a lot of guts and I think that's the right word for 8x8 magazine to hold that video. I mean, if the U.S. gets eliminated by Spain in that first knockout match in the round of 16, then that's not it's not much of a story if they release that video then. But they held on until a couple days before the France game and put this out, and it blows up, and then all of a sudden there's this Twitter beef that you mentioned. And yeah, I mean, my first thought was like, this is a distraction. This is this is not good for any team that's going into a big game to have this kind of thing. And for all the talk, earlier in the tournament about how the players were off Twitter, they were keeping everything on the outside. They really weren't on social media at all. They were kind of insulating themselves inside this bubble. That clearly got through. That clearly permeated. We saw players like Ali Krieger and Ali Long, speaking out on social media afterwards. But the funny thing is that, it was almost, and my colleague Dan Wetzel at Yahoo wrote about this. You see, it was almost the best thing that could have happened to them, because you see all the time coaches trying to create distractions to get everyone talking that takes the pressure off the matter at hand. And I think that was the case. I mean, all of a sudden, no one was talking about the game anymore. No one was talking about the French team. No one was talking about, hey, Alex Morgan hasn't scored since the opening match. Is Lindsey Horan going to play? All of that stuff kind of stopped. And I think it let the U.S. kind of refocus, and it really helped them. I mean, in the same way you saw, and again, this happens all the time. You saw Phil Neville, the England women's team coach, try to kind of create a dispute about the U.S. team scouting their hotel, which was completely ridiculous and made up out of nothing. But there was a reason he did it. I mean, it was to take the pressure off his team, and again, in a funny way, it wasn't something of their own creation. And Megan made the point. She said, "Look, I didn't come out and say anything this week. Like, this is old. There's nothing I can do if this comes up months later, after the fact." So that part of it was really interesting, and to see how they went into that France game, refocused after getting a good scare against Spain. And I thought that was really interesting. And then obviously, you can't write this stuff. I mean, Rapinoe gets the first goal less than 5 minutes in on a free kick that, was not a shot, and the keeper, shouldn't have let in. And then she gets a sitter to close it out. And this is, as a sports writer, this is the stuff you dream of. So, the theater that week, and to cap it off with a win against France in Paris, it was really surreal. It was incredible. One of the most incredible things I've ever been lucky enough to cover. So, pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, you talk a lot about the intersection there of politics and sports. Listeners, if you haven't done so, it's a French documentary, but on Netflix. If you go back, you could follow the 98 France team that won the first World Cup, and the politics surrounding that was fascinating. And I think a lot of the women and the politics, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of boosted them. They got a bigger stage because of it. They stuck to their guns and they performed well, and that's all you can ask for. But let me ask you something regarding the U.S. women. Miguel Delaney, he's a football writer for The Independent, and he tweeted out July 7th this: the U.S. women's national team isn't much liked by a lot of neutrals because it's one of the first times a U.S. team has dominated a truly international sport, bringing all the worst of the individualistic obnoxiousness of U.S. sporting culture to truly international competition for a rare occasion. When you spoke to fans, when you spoke to all these people, did the individualistic nature of some of the players kind of throw people off?
Yeah, it's a good question. That was not my experience, I have to say. And I saw Miguel's tweet at the time, and he's entitled to his opinion. I disagree. Again, I think the team was more popular than a lot of people either want to admit or realize. And the people I saw and the people that I spoke to on the ground in France, no matter where they were from, they knew who Megan Rapinoe was, and they were a fan of hers, and they did not have a problem with her outspokenness or arrogance or anything like that. And frankly, the only people I saw complaining about the 13-0 win in the first game were people on Twitter from back in the States and elsewhere. And the funny thing is, and I said this at the time, like the Thai players and coach weren't offended. So I don't know why anyone, you're entitled to your opinion. I understand, and I've coached teams, where I told our players not to run up the score or to make 3 passes before you shoot or whatever it is. But this is not under 9 soccer. This is the World Cup, and I really think that narrative of arrogance was really overblown, and it's lazy. When you're around this team, I mean, they're confident and and they've earned the right to be. So there's a difference there. I mean, this is a team of champions, and I really thought that they had a lot of neutrals on their side by the time that tournament was over. I really did. And again, for some of the reasons we mentioned, but the way they handled themselves, I thought they handled themselves brilliantly and in some very difficult situations. I'm sure a lot of people feel the way Miguel does around the world, but that was certainly not my experience with the people I spoke to on the ground in France.
Now, Doug, shifting to the kind of the overarching effect of this Women's World Cup. I mean, obviously, the NWSL came out and they said, hey, look, we now are going to have 14 of our games broadcast on ESPN. The first one's actually, as we're recording, the Orlando Pride and Portland Thorns playing. Do you think that this Women's World Cup, I know we say this for almost every World Cup, if it's a men's, it'll give a boost to MLS. Do you think this Women's World Cup will have a very strong, effect positively for the NWSL?
Well, it can't hurt. I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't know how much it'll have an effect. How much, I don't know. And that's, maybe a pessimistic answer, but I think that it's important that we are realistic. And, there'll be a boost, and it's certainly encouraging to see that league get more exposure, more sponsorship dollars. All that stuff's important. But there's no magic pill. There's no one event that's gonna catapult that league into a different stratosphere. I think that there needs to be slow and steady growth, like we've seen with the way MLS is built, and given the way that the 2 women's leagues that came before the NWSL went, I think it's really important that the owners of that league don't get ahead of themselves, and really make sure that they're not overextending or not not making any rash decisions based on some marketing bump from the World Cup. But it is a quality league. Look, it's the best league probably top to bottom in the world. I am a bit concerned because to be over in Europe and to see what some of the European teams are doing. I mean, you look at Lyon, the facilities they have, their stadium is incredible. I mean, that's an NFL caliber stadium that they have, for a first division team in France, and the training facilities available to teams like Real Madrid, who just announced plans to start a women's team. I think it's going to be difficult for the NWSL to keep up if Europe continues to invest in women's soccer, because it's already the number 1 sport there. There's fans of these clubs are already there. It's not quite the same as an Orlando City trying to get fans to go see the Pride, and that's a team I think that's even more closely linked than many others in the NWSL to their men's team. But yeah, there's a built-in fan base for a lot of these teams around the world. And like I said, all the infrastructure's in place, the coaching, the know-how, the expertise, the opportunities, the culture, it's already there. So I think it's going to be tricky for the NWSL to really be a player long term, but it is a fantastic league, and if you enjoyed watching these women from all around the world, not just the U.S. women's team, do their thing over in France, I think it's definitely worth checking out. It's worth going to a game. Tickets are cheap. You can take your family. It's a nice day out, and there's some absolute world-class athletes in that league. So it's good news. It's good to see. I think that league is going to get better and better. But yeah, I would refrain from saying that the World Cup is going to make all the difference for that league, as big a deal as it was, and as much momentum as it has generated.
Doug, last question here before we let you go. Jill Ellis's contract is set to expire at the end of this month. Is there any inclination that she'll be back as U.S. women's national team manager for the next cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I asked her in the press conference right after the game, and I didn't think I would get an answer, but I did want to put her on the spot, get her on the record. And she said, she hadn't even thought about it, which I don't believe. I'm sure she's thought about it. From everyone I've talked to, the sense is that she's going to walk away, and why wouldn't she? It's hard coaching a national team. It's very hard to do it for 3 cycles. Most coaches don't do it for 2. And there's a reason why she's the first women's coach and only the second coach in World Cup history, and the first in over 80 years to win back-to-back World Cups. That's a tremendous accomplishment, and one we're not talking about nearly enough, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Ellis could be back. Listen, she made, she's got a year left in her contract, her contract expires at the end of the month, but there is an option for her. She has an option that she can exercise. U.S. Soccer has an option that it can exercise if she wants to come back. Her annual salary is $500,000 a year. So is she going to leave, $500,000 on the table and walk away? I don't know. But Jill Ellis is going to have a lot of opportunities, I think, down the line to do whatever she wants, whether that's speaking engagements or, I still think she's going to end up as coach of England at some point. That's where she was born. She talked often in this tournament, over the course of the tournament, about how she didn't get the chance to play as a little girl in England. It was actually against the rules of the FA. The FA in England did not allow women to play, or young girls to play soccer when she was a little girl. And I think that that's something that, that still bothers her on some level. And I think just the symbolism of maybe getting a chance to lead the English team down the road. It's an up and coming program. There's going to be money available there. I think they're wealthy enough to pay her, what she could command. But we haven't seen the last of her. But I think just the sense I get is that she might step away. She's got a teenage daughter she probably wants to spend time with. And the only thing that really, beyond the money that's left for her to prove is to win an Olympic gold medal. So it's possible she comes back for another year. But if you put me on the spot, I would say it's probably 60-40 that she walks away at this point.
Doug, thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, you can follow him by Doug McIntyre. All his work is on Yahoo Sports. So I wanted to give you the floor if you wanted to add anything else before we let you go.
Yeah, no, the one thing I would say is that the only disappointing part, and again, incredible experience, incredible to get the chance to cover any World Cup. And this was right up there for me in terms of events that I've covered. But a little disappointed that the Gold Cup was going on at the same time. When I would love to have covered that tournament as well. And anytime the U.S. men are in a final against Mexico, that's the sort of game you want to cover. So for all the talk about how it was no good for the fans, I really didn't see it that way. I mean, I think that if you're a U.S. soccer fan, you had no problem getting up in the morning watching the women win the Women's World Cup and then watching the men's game at night. But the unfortunate thing from a media point of view was a lot of people had to make a choice, and I think that's unfortunate for both tournaments. I think the coverage could have been better for both tournaments. if they had been played at different times. And certainly there was a lot of people that would have been at the Gold Cup final that weren't, because they were covering the World Cup, and that's the right decision. And that, from an organizational standpoint, that was our priority, and it should have been. But I hope it doesn't happen again, because we need as much coverage of all soccer in North America, I think, as possible. So that's the only thing I would say. But beyond that, tremendous experience and a real privilege to get to cover an amazing team. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I hope U.S. team made some new fans, and will continue to grow the fan base, and I'm sure they will.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks again, Doug.
You got it, guys. Anytime.
Little bit of news there, huh, Jake?
Sounds like it. Sounds like there's some hints that Jill Ellis won't be back as manager of the national team. That's kind of some big news.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. I mean, the Olympics are next year, so the U.S. do have to prepare for that. I know they just celebrated their 4th title, but we do have to move on and get ready for the Olympics in that cycle of things. But guys, something that also caught my attention that Doug mentioned was how the European domestic leagues are gonna grow, and he's he has a little concern with the NWSL, and we talked about it here on the show. But Armand, your sources or the people you've ran into tell you otherwise.
I'm kind of torn, right? Like I'm kind of torn, because these leagues are what a lot of people say. The NWSL is easily the best league in the world, right, in terms of talent. But as we always mention, these European leagues are starting to invest money because they're starting to see return from it, right? They're starting to see return, and once you start investing it, you start seeing return. You're gonna start investing more. I mean, Real Madrid really just bought the license to have a women's team. Like, why would Real Madrid do that? Leon obviously is kind of the blueprint of what you want for a women's team, I guess, in the future, and they have so much investment as well. Look, the NWSL, I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, but it's approaching that point, because the NWSL has so much concentrated talent, if that makes any sense, right? So a lot of talent's concentrated. Their football is going to be better overall. In Europe, you might have 2 or 3 teams in the French league, or maybe a couple teams in the English league that are really good as well. But throughout the NWSL, all the teams are pretty quality. I think the next step for NWSL is hopefully they figure out a way to get bigger pockets into the league and have more investment. And I wouldn't if MLS, like what Liga MX does. I mean, if MLS says, hey, like, part of expansion fee, you have to invest in the women's team, like, why not? I don't see how that's an issue in any way, shape, or form. And that helps the league grow as well with more deeper pockets. I mean, they can't even accept a deal with Barcelona because of a sponsorship issue. Like, how dumb that is? One of the biggest teams in the world wants to invest in your league, but you have a huge sponsorship conflict. Like, come on. Like, that's bizarre to me. I mean, yeah, I just think it's incompetency. I don't know. If the NWSL becomes worse than these leagues, it's honestly 100% due to incompetency. No other thing about it.
Listeners, we asked Doug on this, but we want to get your take as well. Question of the day: do you think the Women's World Cup will have a positive impact on NWSL? And if so, how big of an impact will it be? Let us know on Twitter at UncSamSoccerPod. You can follow Steven Jodran at Steven Jodran. You can follow Armand Kafai at Armand Kafai. You can follow me at Jake Watroba. For Steven, for Armand, I'm Jake. We'll talk to you guys next time.